This video is full of 9 everyday spiritual lessons we miss, not because they're hidden, but because we're too busy explaining ourselves to people who stopped listening back in 1997. But part 6, when someone tries to provoke you? That one? That's the key to emotional freedom in your golden years. It's how you keep your peace when someone else keeps losing theirs. If that sounds like medicine for your soul, like, subscribe, and help us reach our first 1,000 quiet warriors. Because around here, we don't shout to be heard. We stay silent and let karma turn up the volume. Part 1. When someone lies about you. Have you ever heard something about yourself that was so untrue you almost laughed until you realized people actually believed it? Maybe it was at the church. Maybe it was in your own family. Maybe it was at bingo night where somehow your name made it into someone else's soap opera. The temptation, of course, is to set the record straight, to barge in with the facts, your timeline, your receipts, and maybe a PowerPoint presentation titled, "Why I'm Not the Villain." But let's pause right there, my friend, because here's what Buddhist psychology and many wise grandmothers will tell you. The truth is like a lotus. It blooms in stillness, not in argument. See, when someone lies about you, they're not just twisting your words, they're testing your balance. And if you're not careful, you'll be pulled into their storm while trying to prove there wasn't one. In Buddhism, we speak of right speech, words that are truthful, kind, necessary, and timely. Nowhere in the teachings does it say, prove yourself to people who never cared to understand you. In fact, not reacting is often the greatest act of clarity. Because here's the quiet truth: those who believe lies didn't trust you in the first place. And trying to convince them? That's like explaining jazz to someone who insists music should only come with lyrics. Let me tell you about Helen, a retired school teacher from Ohio with a short haircut, a sharp wit, and a legendary lemon cake. One Sunday morning, she overheard whispers in the church parking lot that she had stolen someone's position on the church committee. Now, Helen hadn't volunteered for anything since the Nixon administration. But once the rumor spread, people started looking at her sideways. Her niece said, "You should speak up, Auntie. Set the record straight." But Helen just smiled and said, "Sugar, you don't stop a fire by screaming at it. You stop it by not adding wood." So she went home, baked another lemon cake, kept showing up to church with her same warm smile and her same stubborn dignity. 2 weeks later, the real story came out. The person who started the rumor had been turned down for the role and wanted to blame someone. The truth returned, like a cat who always finds its way back. And Helen, she never raised her voice, just kept baking. From a psychological view, especially in later life, emotional regulation becomes the mark of maturity. Older adults who practice emotional restraint tend to experience lower stress levels, better long-term memory, and ironically, greater trust from others because they don't over-explain or panic. When you choose silence in the face of a lie, you're not being passive. You're letting people reveal themselves. Because here's what happens. The liar gets louder, the story gets wilder, and the truth gets clearer. So what do you do when someone lies about you? You don't chase them down. You don't try to out-talk them. You let karma take the long route, because it always circles back. If the mud is stirred, the water is unclear. But if you wait, the dirt will settle and clarity will return. Every Buddhist monk, and probably your grandma, stay soft, stay clear. And next time someone lies about you, consider doing what Helen did. Go bake something. Go for a walk. Go pet a dog. Let your silence be the only proof you need. Part 2. When someone betrays you. There's a special kind of sting that comes not from falling, but from being pushed by someone you thought was holding your hand. Betrayal is one of life's rudest surprises. And if you've made it past 60, chances are you've been betrayed at least once. Maybe by a friend, maybe by family, Maybe by that sweet-talking neighbor who borrowed your garden hose and moved to Florida. And what's the first instinct? To confront, to demand answers, to yell, "How could you?" Or if you're Buddhist, to whisper it very calmly but with the eyes of a tiger. But let's step back, because here's a quiet truth worth remembering. In Buddhism, we learn that pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. Betrayal hurts, but clinging to that hurt? That's where we suffer the most. In Buddhist psychology, betrayal is not just about the other person. It's about our attachment to who we thought they were. We weren't just betrayed by their actions. We were betrayed by our own expectation that they would never disappoint us. It's a bit like leaving your sandwich out and expecting the seagulls not to take it. The mistake wasn't the seagull. It was thinking you could nap peacefully with lunch on your chest. Let me tell you about Sarah, a 72-year-old woman from Portland with more cardigans than grudges, usually. She had a best friend named Carol. They shared everything: recipes, laughter, and the occasional secret about who really won at bridge night. Then one day, Sarah confided in Carol about a health scare. It was private, raw, personal. And a week later, she heard about it from Barbara, and from Mabel, and from Carol's hairdresser. Sarah was heartbroken. Her first instinct was to call Carol, demand an apology, make her understand what she had done. But instead, Sarah poured herself a cup of chamomile tea, sat on the porch with her cat, and said, "If someone can't hold what's precious, maybe it's time I stop handing it to them." She didn't make a scene. She didn't stage a friendship trial in the knitting circle. She simply stopped sharing her soul where it wasn't safe. And you know what happened? Carol noticed the silence. She called, texted, even showed up with brownies. But Sarah had already moved her trust somewhere softer. To her journal, her garden, and a few friends who never gossiped because they were too busy napping. In elder psychology, one of the gifts of aging is the ability to choose peace over people-pleasing. As we get older, we no longer need to make everyone understand. We start valuing our emotional energy the way we once valued our pensions. And here's the kicker: people who betray you already know what they did. Explaining it to them is like giving a weather report to someone standing in the rain. They're already wet. They just don't care. When you choose silence over confrontation, you're not weak. You're wise enough to stop offering explanations to people who only hear what makes them feel innocent. If someone betrayed you, here's your Buddhist-friendly prescription. Don't react. Reflect. Don't explain. Accept. Don't chase an apology. Give yourself permission to walk away quietly. You can wish them well without inviting them back. You can bless them from afar, with the door gently closed and locked, maybe with a wind chime to keep them from sneaking in. And remember, when someone drops the bowl you handed them, don't hand it back. Sweep up the pieces and serve your soup somewhere else. Let them feel the weight of your absence. Let your silence do the talking. It speaks in a language only the soul can hear. Part 3. When they insult you. Some people throw insults like confetti, except it's not colorful. It's just messy, and nobody's having fun. You've probably been there. Someone makes a snide comment, something like, "Oh, must be nice to just sit around all day now that you're retired." Or my personal favorite, "I didn't know you were still driving." It's the still that really sings, doesn't it? Now your younger self might have snapped back with something clever, something sharp. But now, you just raise an eyebrow, take a slow sip of your tea and think, I could respond, but do I really want to interrupt my peace for this person? Here's a lovely image from Buddhist tradition. When someone hands you a hot coal, it only burns you if you grab it. Insults are the same. Words come flying towards you, hot and bitter. But if you don't reach out and hold them close, if you don't react, they pass like smoke. You don't have to accept the gift of poison just because it's offered with a smile. Let me tell you about George, 78, ex-mailman, full-time philosopher of the local barbershop. One day, George walks into the salon for his usual trim and hears the guy in the next chair say loudly, "Man, George, you're still getting haircuts? I figured there'd be nothing left up there by now." The younger George might have barked back or maybe made a scene. But this George? He looked at the guy, smiled, and said, "Some people lose hair. Some lose tact." Then he leaned back, closed his eyes, and enjoyed his shampoo like the king he was. What happened next? The guy laughed nervously. The barber gave George a wink, and the insult dissolved into the air, embarrassed it had shown up in the first place. One of the blessings of aging is that you stop needing to win arguments and start wanting to preserve your energy. Insults feed off attention. They're like raccoons. If you keep feeding them, they keep showing up. Psychologists will tell you, responding to provocation activates the stress response. Blood pressure rises, heart rate increases, and for what? To prove to someone rude that you can be rude back? Silence, dear one, is not submission. It's senior-level emotional mastery. And let's be honest, by the time you've made it to 70, you've already survived heartbreak, hip replacements, and hospital gowns with questionable ventilation. You've got nothing to prove. If someone insults you, ask yourself, do I actually care what this person thinks? Is this worth my emotional rent space? Or should I just smile and let them talk while I go mentally reorganize my spice rack? The tongue has no bones, but it can break peace if you let it. But silence, that's where wisdom sleeps with its shoes off. So next time someone tries to poke you with words, remember this. Just because they threw the first pebble doesn't mean you need to build them a mountain. Part 4. When they play the victim, you know the type. They bump into you, and somehow it's your fault they got hurt. They twist the truth like a yoga instructor with a grudge, leaving out key details, playing innocent and crying on cue, especially when the right audience is watching. They always seem to be the ones just trying their best, as they quietly push you under the bus with a soft smile and a heartfelt sigh. If you're over 60, you've probably met a few. Heck, you may even be related to one. And no judgment, we all take a spin on the stage now and then. But when someone makes every situation about how they've been wronged, even when they're the one holding the matches and the gasoline, that's when your silence becomes sacred. In Buddhist teaching, there's a saying, when someone clings to illusion, do not argue. Offer compassion, then step away. Why? Because the person playing the victim isn't interested in truth. They're interested in position, in being seen as innocent, wounded, and superior by moral default. Trying to reason with them is like trying to explain the weather to a fog machine. Let's talk about Rachel, a 68-year-old retired nurse with a soul of gold and a radar for nonsense. Rachel had a coworker, let's call her Donna, who had mastered the art of victimhood like it was an Olympic sport. If Rachel asked for help, Donna was being picked on. If Rachel stood up for herself, Donna felt unsafe. If Rachel breathed in a tone Donna didn't like, it was considered aggressive respiratory behavior. One day, after being guilt-tripped again for something she didn't do, Rachel took a deep breath, looked Donna in the eye, and said, "I'm not arguing. I'm just going to go water my plants and pretend this never happened." And she did. No explaining, no defending, no participation in the performance. And just like that, Donna was left without a stage. As we age, we develop what psychologists call emotional conservation, a fancy term that really just means, I don't have time for this nonsense anymore. Reacting to a victim player feeds the drama loop. You explain, they twist, you show receipts, they cry, you walk away, and now you're cold and abandoning them. The only way out? Don't audition for the part. Buddhism teaches compassion with boundaries. We don't hate the person, but we also don't hand them the microphone. Let them speak their version. Let karma handle the edits. If someone insists on telling a story where you're the villain, let them. You've outgrown the need to be understood by people committed to misunderstanding you. Let their spotlight dim. Let your peace stay lit. So here's your gentle reminder. You don't need to correct every lie. You don't need to defend yourself against every sad sigh and crocodile tear. You can smile, nod, and go back to your tea and crossword puzzle. Let them talk. You just be still. Mountains don't explain themselves to windstorms. And remember, silence isn't cold, it's clarity. You're not abandoning them. You're just choosing peace over performance. Part 5, when they don't see your worth. Here's a funny thing about being generous. If you do too much, people stop saying thank you and start asking why you didn't do more. At first, it's little things. You call, they don't call back. You cook, they forget to say it was good. You show up, and they barely look up from their phones, or worse, ask if you brought dessert. And slowly, something in your heart whispers, they don't see me, I'm just convenient. Let's not sugarcoat it. Being undervalued is painful, even if you've learned how to smile through it. But here's what Buddhist wisdom and about 70 years of life can teach us. You are not a bargain bin version of yourself just because someone else refuses to see your full price. Buddhism reminds us that value is not given, it's realized. You don't become more valuable when someone notices you. You don't become less valuable when someone doesn't. Think of a diamond dropped in the mud. It may be dirty, but it's still a diamond. And let's be honest, some of us are diamonds with a bit of mud and a few cat hairs. You don't need to shout your worth from the rooftops. You just need to stop whispering it to people who aren't listening. Let me introduce you to Marjorie, a 74-year-old queen of casseroles and emotional labor. For years, Marjorie was the glue in her family. She remembered birthdays, made the holiday dinners, sent care packages to her grandkids. She was the reason Thanksgiving happened at all. And slowly, no one thanked her. They just showed up late, scrolled through their phones, and left with Tupperware. So one year, she did something radical. She stopped. No invites, no pies, no family group text reminders, just silence and a trip to the botanical garden. And guess what? Her daughter called in a panic. "Mom, what's going on?" Marjorie just smiled and said, "I decided to let everyone experience what it's like without the person they forgot was holding it all together." Now that's not petty, that's spiritual. As we age, we develop something called selective investment theory, which basically means I'm done spending energy where there's no return. You realize you don't have to keep performing your worth for people who benefit from it, but refuse to acknowledge it. And you learn the deep truth that walking away quietly teaches people more than 1,000 heartfelt speeches. So what do you do when someone doesn't see your worth? Don't yell. Don't beg. Don't reintroduce yourself like a brand new TV show. Just step back. Let your silence become a mirror. Let them feel the absence of what they once took for granted. Some people need to lose access to you before they realize they needed you all along. And if they never realize it, that's okay too, because you've got better things to do, like watering your peace, replanting your joy, and maybe, just maybe, baking a pie for yourself this time. Part 6. When someone tries to provoke you. You ever notice how some people don't really want to talk? They want to poke. They want to get a rise out of you. They want your reaction, not your opinion. They're not after connection. They're after combustion. You walk into the room smiling and they say, "Wow, you look brave wearing that." You share a happy moment and they reply, "Must be nice for people who don't have real problems." Ah yes, the professional pot stirrers. They've been around forever. And if you're over 60, you've probably outlived more instigators than you can count. Some may even be sitting next to you at the family reunion. But here's the thing. Their power only works if you light the fuse. In Buddhism, we often speak of the 3 poisons: greed, hatred, and delusion. Instigators often operate from all 3 at once and try to pull you in with them. But here's a better teaching to keep in your front pocket. Do not let others pull you into their fire. Sit by your own flame and keep the tea warm. If someone is trying to trigger you, you're not required to take the bait. Let them poke the air while you water your garden. Let me introduce you to Al, a 75-year-old retired accountant who found himself serving on his neighborhood's HOA board, a job he now refers to as emotional landscaping. There was another board member, let's call him Ted, who always found a way to poke Al during meetings. Every suggestion Al made was too idealistic. Every vote he cast was met with an eye roll. At one point, Ted even accused Al of trying to turn the HOA into a meditation retreat. Now, younger Al might have snapped, might have given him a spreadsheet full of "please shut up," but seasoned Al, he nodded, smiled, and replied, "You know, Ted, it's amazing how loud your thoughts sound when I don't respond to them." And then he went back to his lemon water. Ted, predictably, had nowhere to go with that. One of the superpowers of growing older, besides being able to nap anywhere, is learning that not every jab requires your energy. In fact, emotional non-reactivity is a key marker of psychological resilience in older adults. People who maintain peace of mind in the face of provocation tend to live longer, sleep better, and strangely enough, confuse the hell out of their enemies, because the instigator wants your heat. When you offer cool silence instead, they melt. Next time someone tries to get a rise out of you, remember this. You don't owe anyone your mood. You don't need to join the circus just because someone brought the tent. And sometimes the most powerful comeback is a sip of tea and a thoughtful, Let others lose their peace looking for yours. You just keep watering your silence. Let them poke. Let them prod. Let them wonder why you didn't flinch. Because that, my friend, is freedom with a smile. Part 7. When they regret losing you. You know what's funny? People don't always realize what you meant to them until you're gone. Not physically gone, just no longer texting first, not always available, not hanging around like a free therapist with snacks. And suddenly, ding, a message pops up. Hey, been thinking about you lately. Or worse, sorry for how things ended. Miss the old times. Now your younger self might have cried, rejoiced, or drafted a thoughtful response with emojis and way too much punctuation. But your seasoned self? You just look at the message, smile softly, and think, oh, you noticed I'm not orbiting around you anymore. How precious. In Buddhism, we're taught about impermanence. Everything changes, connections fade, attachments dissolve, and sometimes people only appreciate your presence once it becomes absence. When the flame goes out, they finally notice the warmth they lost. But here's the catch. Just because they regret it doesn't mean you have to reopen the door. Forgiveness doesn't require repetition. Compassion doesn't require a reunion tour. Let me tell you about Olivia, 69, a retired librarian and part-time bird watcher with a laugh that could calm a thunderstorm. Olivia was in a long-term relationship years ago. She gave and gave, her time, her tenderness, her attention. Her partner, however, gave mainly indifference. He always assumed she'd stay, until one day she didn't. No dramatic exit, no angry monologue, just a handwritten note and a copy of The Art of Letting Go left on the kitchen counter. Years passed, and then one summer afternoon, while sipping iced tea on her porch, her phone buzzed. It was him. I've been thinking about you. I realize now how much I took for granted. Olivia stared at the message. She thought of her garden, her peace, her quiet mornings, and she replied, "Thank you. I hope you're well. I'm happy where I am." Then she turned her phone off and went back to her birds. In later life, we developed something called selective remembering, a beautiful, if tricky, phenomenon where the brain naturally focuses on peacefulness and meaning. That's why some people come back into our lives years later, not because they're healed, but because they're nostalgic. But memory isn't love, regret isn't responsibility, and your healing isn't a revolving door. Just because someone wakes up doesn't mean you have to let them back into the bed. So what do you do when someone regrets losing you? You smile, you forgive, if your heart is ready, and you keep walking. No explanations, no essays, no return flights. Because when you've walked through fire, when you've rebuilt your peace, when you've planted a whole new garden where the ash once lived, you don't owe anyone an invitation to re-enter. Let them sit with their lesson. You sit with your peace. And remember, silence doesn't mean there's nothing to say. It means the most important part has already been said, by how you live now. Part 8. When your success makes others uncomfortable. Here's something nobody tells you when you start growing into your authentic self after 60. Some people won't clap. Some will cough, shuffle in their seat, and ask if you're okay. You finally take that watercolor class you've always dreamed of, and your friend says, "Wow, so you're an artist now?" You get a little recognition for something beautiful, and someone mutters, "Well, must be nice to have all that free time." It's not that you're doing anything wrong. It's that your light shines a little too brightly on someone else's unfulfilled dreams. And that, my friend, is not your fault, but it is your choice, whether you dim or not. In Buddhism, we are taught the principle of mudita, sympathetic joy, the ability to feel happiness for others without comparison or resentment. But not everyone has trained in joy. Some folks look at your peace and see a mirror of their own neglect. Your glow becomes a reminder that they too could have bloomed, but didn't. Let them look. You keep blooming. You don't owe anyone a smaller version of yourself to make them comfortable. Let me tell you about Joan, 72, who picked up writing poetry again after nearly 5 decades of motherhood, caregiving, and getting around to it. She started reading her poems at a local open mic, sharing little verses about loneliness, tea kettles, and the kind of sadness that sits in your bathrobe pocket. People loved her work. They clapped, they cried, and soon she was invited to read at a regional event. Her longtime friend, Gloria, didn't come. When Joan gently asked why, Gloria said, "I don't know. It just feels like you've changed. You used to be more normal." Joan smiled, placed a soft hand on her friend's arm, and said, "Honey, I haven't changed. I just stopped pretending to be small." She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She let her poems speak, and she kept writing. In elder psychology, we see that people who finally express themselves through art, travel, movement, or solitude often experience friendship friction. Why? Because freedom looks like betrayal to those still clinging to duty or self-sacrifice. And yet, this is where your silence becomes powerful. You don't defend your right to grow. You don't justify joy. You let your life speak for itself. Let those uncomfortable with your wings sit quietly. You weren't born to stay in the nest. So what do you do when someone shrinks back from your success? You don't dim. You don't shrink. You don't tuck your joy into a napkin and hide it under the table. You smile, you keep blooming, and you remember, your growth is not a threat. It's an invitation to those ready to rise. And for those who aren't ready, let them grumble in the hallway. You've got a life to live, and maybe a poem to write about it later. Part 9. When you finally found peace and they try to reignite the fire. Let's paint a picture. You finally made it. Not made it in the billionaire yacht sense. I mean peaceful. Your mornings are soft, your tea stays warm, the people in your life are there because they choose to be, not because they're attached with guilt tape. And then, like a raccoon at a picnic, here comes someone from your past, digging through your trash looking for leftovers. They message you out of nowhere, "Hey, we should catch up," or worse, "I've changed." And suddenly you feel that old flicker, the mix of discomfort, confusion, and the deep down knowing that this was a fire that nearly burned you last time. In Buddhism, we're taught to recognize the returns of suffering and to bow to it without inviting it inside. Not all visitors deserve a seat at your table. Some were just meant to pass by. When you've cultivated peace, not everyone will understand it. Especially those who once thrived on your chaos. Some people aren't coming back to reconnect. They're coming back to see if they can still pull the strings. Let's talk about Walter, 76, retired mechanic, vinyl collector, and Zen gardener. Walter had a brother, David, who spent decades alternating between silent treatment, manipulation, and occasional charm. Every family gathering was a tightrope walk. Eventually, Walter had enough. He stopped chasing reconciliation. He planted vegetables, learned to breathe, let the phone ring. 5 years passed. Then one afternoon, a message arrived. "I miss the old days. Let's talk." Now, Walter wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. He just didn't need the drama anymore. So he responded with a simple line, "I hope you're well. I'm good where I am." And then he went back to pruning his roses. As we age, we learn something critical. Not every opportunity for reconnection is a gift. Some are tests. Psychologists call it emotional sobriety, the ability to feel the pull of old patterns and say, "Not today." You don't need to explain, you don't need to defend, you don't need to light up a dusty conversation just because it's trying to smolder again. You can just smile, nod, and let the call go to voicemail. Here's the final truth in this journey of quiet strength. If you found peace, guard it like a candle in the wind. If someone tries to drag you back into chaos, remember who you became after you left. And if they ask why you're so quiet now, just smile and say, because peace doesn't shout, it just stays. You don't need to reignite anything. The fire served its purpose. It burned what needed to go. You've rebuilt. And now you get to rest in the warmth of your own light. You've just walked through 9 sacred moments when silence isn't passive, it's powerful. Moments when defending yourself was a trap, proving yourself was a loss, and saying nothing was the deepest yes to your own soul. Let others keep talking, let karma keep moving, let time do the teaching. You've earned your quiet, you've earned your peace, and when silence is chosen with love, it speaks volumes. If this journey resonated with you, I invite you to stay close, subscribe, breathe with us, and let's keep learning together. Not through noise, but through the sacred sound of stillness.